Welcome to your journey of healing with the Healing Podcast, hosted by licensed clinician Monique Owe and co-host Dr. Amber Moan.
Thank you for tuning into the Healing Podcast. I'm your host, Monique Owe, and Dr. Moan is not here today, so it's just me. So let's talk about some things. Today's topic is the struggle people have with taking accountability. Okay, so the accountability, let's start with a basic definition, right? Just make sure everybody is clear. So accountability is basically the obligation to explain, justify, and take responsibility for one's actions, right? Of course, so that seems fair to want to be responsible, right? Those things. So it seems simple enough, right? Just to be responsible, just to, be able to justify or explain your actions and move forward, right? That seems simple enough. But why is it such a struggle for people? Well, because that means you really would have to look in the mirror and face something you did. Now, here's the thing. Everything is not that big of a deal. If you maybe you made a mistake and spilled some water on the floor. Not a big deal. Yes, I was the one that spilled the water. You can clean it up. Now, some people don't even do that, but that's simple, right? You make a simple mistake, you drop something, you spill something, maybe even break a glass, maybe with somebody's favorite glass, but it might be a little simple to say, listen, I'm the one that did that. I'm sorry for that. Let me pay for it, or let me somehow make it up to you. You would think that's simple, right? Well, that's on a smaller scale. But what happens is that the bigger things, the things that happen in people's lives that have a bigger weight to them, that's where the struggle with accountability comes in, because that means you will have to probably face some type of consequence. It could be a major consequence. It can be something small but major to you. And that's the issue. Now, I want to say in this episode, while I am going to touch on accountability, right? Because we always want people to be accountable for their actions. But many times when we talk about accountability, we're looking at other people, not looking at ourselves. So I want to say, even with this episode, I'm even being introspective, because you always want to look at self to see what are you not doing versus trying to point the finger. Now, I'm not saying you can't share this episode. Of course, I want you to share it. This might be helpful for somebody. Maybe somebody does need to hear it. But what I hope happens is that you also look at yourself to see what you may need to be accountable for, or just do a self-check to make sure that you are always accountable, right? Or as much as possible, right? Because there is no perfection. So here's the thing. Why is it such a struggle? Well, let's look at the consequence that comes with being accountable. When you do things and you have to be accountable, that means you really have to face what you did. And sometimes what you did is a major thing. Like maybe you stole some money, and as a result of you stealing some money, you know that the person you stole from had to face a major consequence. Like maybe they took a major loss, right? You know that. Or maybe you betrayed somebody's trust and you just feel guilty about it. You know that what you did was wrong and you feel bad about it now because you feel like you've lost a significant relationship because you did betray them in a way. So it's hard to face that. It's hard to admit that, because it would mean admitting that you at one point did something that was not so great. I'm not going to say that makes you a bad person. That's not what I'm here for. And I don't know if one act makes you a bad person, but it does mean you made a bad decision at one point for whatever reason, right? But let's talk into those reasons about what's going on, but why people lack accountability. Well, let's go into some basics. Sometimes people are scared. They are. And if this is you, you may be scared. You may feel there's going to be some punishment. People are going to be less forgiving of you. They're going to judge you. And yes, we do live in a society and a time where people are very judgmental, right? And because of social media, things happen and they spread like wildfire. So where if you do something, it's out there right away. And then not only do you have to face it, but the opinions of others, you have to face that as well. So sometimes having to face that, it can become fearful to you. It can feel like, wow, that's too much for me to deal with. I don't want to deal with so much judgment. I don't want people to not have this opinion about me. So you rather not be accountable. You rather avoid talking about that thing, right? Okay, that's one reason people may lack accountability. Also, sometimes it may mean that maybe you're just not confident in the ability that, that you did make a mistake, but you can still turn it around. Sometimes some people feel that this one thing that they did, or maybe they've done a couple things, they're not confident to show who they really are and that they can change. So they rather not even talk about it, not address it, because it would mean that I'm flawed. It would mean that they have issues and that, you know what, they're not perfect. And sometimes as people have an issue with showing that they are not perfect. And the thing is, none of us are. No one is perfect. But people seem to feel we have to display perfection, right? Then it's sometimes, you know what, which is kind of, this one might be a little upsetting to some people. Some people don't care. They just don't care. They don't care about how their behavior, how their actions has affected you or has affected someone else. They are really focused on self and how they look, or they're just nonchalant, like it doesn't matter. They're very selfish. So they just, oh, well, it doesn't matter. If I did something, oh, well, deal with it, right? That sometimes is the case. We don't want it to be that. You would think people do not have malicious behavior like that, but sometimes it happens. So either way, whatever the reason a person may lack accountability, here's the thing. It's a problem. It's a problem because if you don't face what you have done or take responsibility for what you have done, you will lose out on things in life, right? You yourself won't grow. If everything is everybody else's fault, well, let me go back. That's another reason people like to blame. Another reason people do not like to be accountable because they like to blame. Everything is everybody else's fault. Nothing is their fault. So it's easier for me to blame you because I don't have to look at myself. Again, it's that looking in the mirror. People sometimes struggle with looking in the mirror. You know, they don't want to face the flaws. So here's the thing. You can keep blaming everybody all your life, but eventually those things are going to catch up with you. You know, and this can go on for a long while. And then sometimes people they help you so much. Like sometimes this happens with children, maybe when they were children, then they become adults, right? If they always got away with things as a child, never had to be held accountable. Every time they made a major mistake, the parent or the guardian in their life just kind of always made a pass about it, right? Okay, don't worry about it, don't do it again. No consequence. Or even a juvenile who may have gotten into trouble when they were younger, maybe they didn't face a severe consequence. Maybe it was just, hey, listen, don't do it again. Kind of slap on the wrist. No severe consequence, no loss of anything. So when you lack the consequence or the lack of the punishment or the consequence, you're not accountable. You don't even learn accountability. But here's the thing. How long are you going to blame people for your actions? Like if you look at yourself right now, the position you are in your life, and we all have room to grow, right? But I'm talking about if you're unhappy with your life, take a look in the mirror. How much of that is because of you and how much is that because of somebody else? Now, I'm not saying people don't do things to you. Like I mentioned before, if someone steals something from you, let's say they rob you and what you had in your pocket was money for your rent. You were going to go buy the money order or the cashier's check for a deposit or whatever. And this person comes and they steal from you. Well, now you're out of being able to pay your rent. Now you may lose your apartment or face late fees and maybe a possible eviction. Or let's say it was a new apartment you were trying to secure. You were happy about it. And this person stole from you. Now you're not going to have that opportunity. Or even more severe, what if it's a down payment for a house and you were about on the way to make the major transfer to get the cashier's check to bring to the closing? Whatever happens, right? It affects you. So yes, I get in that sense you would blame them. Because, yeah, they did it. They stole from you. They should be accountable. And you're right. They should. But I'm not talking about those instances. I'm talking about the instances where something you did or the lack thereof, and you're struggling with admitting it. So, for example, maybe you lost your job. And the reason you lost your job is because you're always late. But every time you're late, you always blame it on everything else. Like there was traffic, there was an accident, or things were happening in the morning. Like, your children were moving too slow, or the elevator wasn't working in your building and it took you a long time to get downstairs. And then, your car was just messed up or whatever. Somebody was blocking your car, all these things. But here's the thing. How long? That happens every now and again. One day is not a problem. That does happen. There are days when we just have everything goes wrong. But when you have a history of that, when you always have a history of arriving late, or you have a history of not being on time to anything, is that people and circumstances getting in your way, or is that you? Is that you who will not get up earlier? Is that you who will not properly plan? Because maybe it's not an early in the morning thing. Maybe it's just that the way you squeeze things together so tightly that you don't have room. You're trying to squeeze too many things together. So the accountability there is stop trying to make everything fit. Stop trying to squeeze everything together because it is going to cause you to run chaotically. And eventually, yes, you're going to arrive late. And then you don't want to hear it, right? Because when here comes the supervisor, the manager, whoever in leadership, you were tardy again, you were late. You don't want to hear it, right? That's the accountability. You don't want to hear how you were late because you feel like I still do a good job. Or someone else was late. You pointed the finger at somebody. Well, they were late too. You didn't say anything. Well, you don't know that. But we're talking about you, looking in the mirror for you. Or how about relationships? You feel like people always do you wrong in relationships. And that could be true. Maybe people have done you wrong. But the thing is, how do you choose your relationships? Do you recognize the signs? The accountability there is, do you recognize the sign when maybe somebody in your life you should not even entertain to be in a relationship with? Or let's say it's not romantic. What if it's just a friend that you're entertaining and you see signs that this person is not on the up and up? You see signs that this person is probably selfish. They're not considerate. They only think of themselves, but you continue to entertain them. There's your accountability there. That's you not saying no when you should say no, right? You trying to be overly understanding or overly nice, right? So you end up entertaining people in your life that you should not have ever entertained. And next thing you know, you get burned by that person, right? Or how about the issue where maybe you didn't want to listen? Maybe people in your life kept telling you, maybe stay away from that type of person or stay away from that person because they're not going to be good for you. And you went ahead, right? And a lot of times we do this when we're younger, right? We're like, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to rebel. And next thing you know, that person they end up doing something to you that really causes major damage in your life. Yes, they are responsible for what they did. That is true. But the fact is, what signs did you ignore? And did you ignore them on purpose just because you wanted to prove to people that you were right, that they were wrong, right? Now let's go into the other decision. What about finances? I think, one financial or I guess entity that has no problem holding us accountable is our credit, right? When you make a wrong decision with credit or finances, those things follow you, don't they? When they pull that credit score and that delinquent bill that happened years ago, when you had a struggle and they constantly remind you, well, what was going on with this account? When you try to apply for something new, oh, your credit score is this now, only because of a past issue, right? So the credit bureau has no problem holding you accountable, and other financial institutions, when you want something, holding you accountable. But let's look at yourself. Financially, are you making good decisions? Are you buying stuff that you probably shouldn't buy right now? Are you spending money on stuff that you shouldn't spend money on? Are you rushing into stuff that you shouldn't rush into? Are you, because you want to have things, and I get it. We all like nice things. We all want to live nicely. But sometimes you have to go through a sacrifice, right? But sometimes you don't want to do that. You want to hurry up and jump out there because you want to sometimes prove to people that you have it together. When these are many times strangers, but you just want to prove something, so you end up putting yourself in a hole because you were just trying to prove to people that you had so many things together. And next thing you know, you're in a hole and you're facing a major consequence. So those are the things with accountability, right? At the end of the day, when you're not accountable for yourself, you will constantly make mistakes that will cause damage in your life. So here's the thing. Let's say if you're not looking at yourself right now, you may know somebody that this describes. Someone who is never accountable for their actions. There's always an excuse as to what's happening. And we all make mistakes, but you find that there's some people that are always in something, always in mess, always in drama, always in a situation. And they lack the ability to look at self and say, wait a minute, what part did I play in this? Now we're not talking about abuse and a perpetrator. This is not what we're talking about. So please, let's just dismiss that. I'm talking about your own actions. You knew that car note was going to be too high, but you just wanted to have that luxury car. Even if it was used, you just wanted to have it. And you knew that car note was going to be expensive. And maybe you could afford the car note, but could you afford the maintenance, right? Could you afford the maintenance that goes with it? The oil change, the coolant flush, the washing of the car, the tune-up if it needs one. Just the regular wear and tear that happens. Maybe the possibility of a tire going flat. Can you afford all the maintenance that goes with that car, right? The brakes, because they can go out, right? Could you afford that? You were so focused on getting the car because it looked like you had a nice car. Or even if it's not a luxury car, you were so focused on getting the car that you forgot about the maintenance. So now you are struggling to pay it. You are not paying certain bills just to pay the car, facing consequence and late fees with those bills, and spending all your money just to maintain having something to show an appearance. I'm not talking about something you need. I know you need to get to work or to other places, but I'm talking about when you have the choice to choose the cheaper car, the used car, the older car, or the one that's more affordable, but you jump to the one that's nicer just because it's something you wanted when you probably could have waited and got your money up and then bought the other car, but you jumped out there, even though you know it might not have been a good decision. So that's where accountability comes in, and you will end up losing every time if you're not accountable for your actions. Okay. So before I go into some of the consequences that come with not being accountable, let me go ahead and make a quick segue here. Let's go into, you guessed it, the situation. So let me go ahead and read the situation today. Dear Healing Podcast, I have started to create a new bond with my father. The rest of my family, my immediate family, does not seem to approve. Over the years, when I was growing up, my father was in and out of my life. It's like sometimes he was there and next thing you know, he was not. I always heard my family say negative things about him, but I never really experienced those negative things personally, other than him not being there sometimes. I just assumed that what they said about him was true. Now that he and I have started to talk more and I am now older, I appreciate the relationship we are now developing. I'm also not sure the things I heard about him over the years are necessarily completely true. I wonder, should I continue to build a relationship with my father, although my family doesn't seem to understand, or should I just continue to keep my distance to keep the peace with everybody else? Well, I thank you for writing into the Healing Podcast and for sharing your situation. And first, let me just commend the fact that you and your father are developing a new relationship. I know that took time and it takes trust to get over things from the past, so I commend you on that. But what I'm going to say simply is, do what you want to do, what makes you feel good. If you like this relationship you're developing with your father, you should continue, because that is your relationship with your father. It is really not about people's opinions about it, because that's between you and your father. And yes, guess what? Sometimes people's perspective of a person is different than your experience. Now, maybe your father was the person your family members are describing. Maybe he was that in the past. Maybe he's not that now. Or maybe he was that to them, but he was not that to you. So what I would say is continue to form your relationship if you want to. Just respectfully tell your family it's your personal choice. They don't have to like it. They don't even have to have a relationship with him. This is your relationship with your father because it makes you feel good. And maybe you'll realize the balance. Maybe some things you heard just were not true, and you can develop. You're now forming your own opinion. So what I'm going to say is I would encourage you to continue to develop the relationship with your father if that is what you would like to do, and not so much worry about everybody else. I think it is fine to develop one relationship here and still maintain the relationships over there. They don't have to intertwine. So I hope that's been helpful to you. And again, congratulations on the new bond you're forming with your father. If you're out there and would like to write into the situation or share your situation, please go to email support@thehealingpodcast.com. Again, that's support@thehealingpodcast.com. Or you can go to the healingpodcast.com website, hit the contact tab, and share your situation by filling out those tabs there. And before I jump back into our episode about the struggle people have with accountability, let me go ahead and make a quick mention here and give room to our sponsor.
Are you someone who has been considering therapy? Perhaps someone else has told you that you need to talk to a therapist. Or maybe you're in a relationship and you want to discuss some challenges that you've been facing with your significant other. Maybe there's a communication issue, perhaps an incident of infidelity. Or maybe you just want to strengthen your relationship because you guys are thinking about taking another step. Maybe you're struggling with anxiety or depression, perhaps grief, life stressors, and you just want to share your thoughts with someone. Well, consider contacting Healing Expressions. Healing Expressions is a private practice located in the Atlanta, Georgia area. You will be given a session at an affordable price with a licensed therapist. If this resonates with you, consider going to healingexpressionsllc.com, reading about the practice, and hitting the contact tab to see if you can book a session. All right. Thank you so much. And back to the Healing Podcast.
Okay. So now that we had a quick word from our sponsor, Healing Expressions, we're going to go back into the struggle people have with accountability. Okay. The struggle people have with accountability, or the consequence. I want to talk about the consequence of it. Let's talk about what happens when you're not accountable. One, you can lose trust. People don't trust you anymore. You become labeled as unreliable. You can lose relationships. You can miss out on opportunities. Now, although those were a few things, but those are some major things. Imagine living life with people not trusting you. Imagine living life with people just like, oh, you're not reliable at all. They never come to you because you just can't be depended on. What about the opportunities you're going to lose? Like if you have a business and you just always fall short, who's going to keep coming to you, right? Because you don't come through. You don't show up, What about the loss of connection in your life? Because people just like, you know what? You don't take accountability ever. I want to leave you alone. I don't want to be around you. It's cool to be a person that likes to stay to self and be introverted. That's fine. But to have to be isolated because of past behavior, that might not be a good thing. That can't feel good all the time. So that's the consequence of not being accountable. So what I would hope is that you would want to do better with that and to look in the mirror and realize, what have I done to create this shift in my life, to not be accountable for my actions and do better? Because here's the thing. Everybody makes mistakes. No one's saying perfection exists. The whole thing about accountability is to face what you did or what you haven't done and to make a change. And yes, it does mean, you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. What does that mean? Yes, some people are going to leave your life because you were not accountable for your actions, but that does not mean you won't form strong relationships in the future. That does mean being accountable means you might have to admit to that person that you messed up or you did something to them that hurt them, and you're acknowledging it, being sorry for it, and then changing your behavior. Yeah, you might lose that relationship. That doesn't mean you're going to lose everything. But a sure way you can lose almost everything is never being accountable. Imagine going through life and doing things and people always letting you get a pass, letting you get a pass, letting you get a pass. Well, then here you are, years later, when you're older, realizing you have no one because you never were accountable for any mistake you made. And again, this is not about you listening to this episode and saying, yep, that's that person over there. I know them. I'm asking you as well. Look in the mirror. Think about the things you've done or have not done. When someone tells you that you make them feel a certain way, do you acknowledge that? When someone tells you that they would like for you to do, like in a relationship, if you're in a relationship with someone and they tell you they would like you to do more of this or less of that, do you take ownership of that? Do you look in the mirror like, you know what, that is true? Or are you always on the defensive? I don't do that, you do that. Or you make me do that. Do they really? So this episode is just about looking in the mirror, realizing you're not perfect. That's fine. It's realizing, okay, I need to change some things and then changing it. And guess what? You may not have the answer of how to do it. Just ask for help. Maybe that person can also tell you how to change or what can be done to be better. Or maybe you can go to someone else. Maybe you can go to, I'm always going to promote therapy, right? Maybe you can read a self-help book. Maybe you can look at some videos about accountability. So it does not mean you have to have all the answers. It just means you have to be willing to try to change and take it step by step, because it's not going to happen overnight. But the fact that you can acknowledge that you have an issue with accountability, that's the first part, okay? So what will you gain from this? If you're accountable, you will gain peace, okay? You won't have to lie, because one other thing that people do when they're not accountable, they end up lying. Because when you don't want to face your action, that means you're lying in a way, because you're lying to yourself, and you're probably lying at least by omission. You're leaving things out so people don't have to know that mistake you made. So you'll gain peace. You will gain more trust in the future. You will gain and have better relationships. You will gain a lot of opportunity. You will be a great leader for yourself and your family, okay? And you will end up even gaining more prosperity in your life, because the better decisions you make and you're accountable, you'll see the opportunities that just come to you because you're being a better person, okay? Those are some of the things you'll gain. So that is what I'm going to leave you with in regards to accountability. I hope this episode has been helpful to you, and I hope that you continue to tune into the Healing Podcast. And again, make sure, go ahead and don't forget healingexpressionsllc.com, as was mentioned prior, if you have therapeutic needs and you're in the Atlanta, Georgia area. So I'll leave you with this last quote, okay? And that is, it's regarding accountability, of course, right? So that quote is, and that is simply, accountability and self-responsibility are critical to our success in personal, professional, and public life. However, we often look for those character traits in others rather than inculcating them in ourselves. And that is by Vishwas Chavan. I hope this episode has been helpful. I thank you for tuning into the Healing Podcast and for your support. And bye-bye.